Hi, I'm Paul Carroll. I'm the editor-in-chief at Insurance Thought Leadership. I'm joined here today by Truett Tate, who is a man of many hats. He's here principally as the chairman of QBE North America, but also as the chairman of the board at an interesting boutique consulting firm named Reference Point, and of an intriguing startup with the wonderful name Thinkably. Truett did a panel at the recent International Insurance Society Global Insurance Forum on a culture of innovation. And on the theory that no good deed should go unpunished, we prevailed on him to come back today and talk a little bit more about that. So Truett, thanks so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Paul. And for anyone watching this, Paul and I have traded a short email or two, but we've never met. And consequently, I've reserved the next couple of words of praise to face him so he has to have a real reaction. We've never met, but I've probably followed him for much longer than he's followed me. And I will not eat up too much time, but it is relevant to what we're talking about today. I knew of Paul back in the 90s, and a CEO who will go unnamed, who was the CEO of a major firm, changed their approach to IBM based on a book Paul wrote back in the mid-90s called Big Blues. And after he is quoted several times by this CEO to me, I ran out, bought the book and read it and loved it. And we may make some references there because I think you were ahead of the curve in some of the things that you pointed out, Paul. So it is an honor to be interviewed by you.
Thank you so much. I scan the bookshelves of people I interview, and yours are far enough away I can't quite tell if one of my books is there, but I'm dreaming that it is.
No, $1 Billion Lessons is, though.
Okay.
In terms of behind me.
Okay.
Yours is upstairs.
Okay, I appreciate that. So I found your panel fascinating. I've written, as you know, a number of books on innovation and believe very much in an innovation culture. Just to sort of get us started, what are some general thoughts you would offer on the importance of an innovation culture and maybe how people start to get there?
Yeah, okay. Well, I really enjoyed the session, I guess, as much as anything because of the terrific panelists that I worked with. And I take my hat off to the IIS because I think they open the door for us to think about innovation not as narrowly as we normally do, i.e. somehow very quickly we connect with technology. And the fact is that I think that the creating a culture of innovation and creativity is an essential ingredient to successful companies. And that culture needs to be kind of all-encompassing and defines the individual experience, not just the corporate experience. So, that's why I quickly agreed to be a part of this. And I love the fact that in this particular case, by and large, all three of the panelists were focusing on elements of the culture that affected how they recruited, how they retained people, how they developed talent, and those aren't the normal ways that we think of innovation. We did address some of the issues between small companies and large companies, and I'm sure we'll come back to that in the course of this discussion. But I guess I've always considered myself a bit of a hybrid. I probably started directly 16 small companies, and yet I've worked for Citibank and Lloyd's and ANZ and QBE, so large global companies, and I've got a passion for the small entrepreneurial. I was the chairman of Lloyd's Development Capital for 10 years, helping small companies become big, and so quite interested in that dynamic and the role that culture plays in that successful transition. And I think innovation and creativity are sometimes either forgotten or underrated in terms of the role they play.
So the classic conflict that I've seen for decades, I've been involved in writing about this sort of stuff, is between incumbents and startups. And startups are always seen as agile and willing to go against the flow and that sort of thing. But incumbents also have a ton of advantages because of the client relationships, the money, the data, all this sort of stuff. How do you think about that? Or where do you come out on the battle between incumbents and startups?
Mhm. I don't think of it as a battle. I think and that's not challenging you for the phrase, it makes good press. It's good headline. The fact is there are characteristics of both that are important for successful companies. They can be considered contrasting because one's large, one is often small. But the fact is maybe I take this view because I consider myself a hybrid and enjoy both worlds. But maybe the way I think of it, I'll try to distill it. We need big companies in a global world. You didn't need a big company, medieval, 16th century, something that covered the village did the trick. Now you need it for scale, you need it for reach, you need it for capital, the big company. But a big company, the price size is often, the price that is paid is bureaucracy, kind of a deliberate speed, caution, a certain amount of rigidity, many of the things that you characterized back in your book, Big Blue or Big Blues. And consequently, I've always been a fan of large companies need to look and learn from small companies to be the best that they can be. They can't be a small company, but they can think about how to make the elephant dance. They're going to be big, so don't argue that. How can they be more agile? How can they be faster? Two of the characteristics least attributed to a large company. And I think there's the value in starting to talk about innovation and creativity, because that culture is the pathway. And maybe it's underrated, but I'm convinced that one of the ways is by studying, by working with, by mentoring, by investing in, not smothering, not acquiring per se small companies, but there are lots of ways to interact so that the large company stays infected by the best of small companies. And one of those is also, I think, the large company that grew very systematically, following patterns, being methodical. That's some of what leads them to bureaucracy. But also you had companies that had executives that had 40 years been in the same company. So one of the elements that, as they try to say, how do we keep creative and how do we keep dynamic and growing and learning, is they've got to hire folks who are those hybrids. I'm not pitching, I'm over 70. I'm not looking for a job right now. But I think that's an important part of how the large companies, the old 40 years, we're so proud, no one's left. That was part of the rigidity. So those are some of the elements. I'll take a breath because we got lots to cover. You've got different angles you want to take.
No, that's interesting. That certainly is what I saw at IBM. My book came out in the 90s, and I talked about what I call their cultural constipation. Basically, just they couldn't make a decision about anything. There were so many people who, as you say, had been there forever. They prided themselves on that, but they just sort of couldn't get out of their own way. A mantra that a colleague and I developed and have actually been preaching for a long time now is that incumbents can win if they think big, start small, and learn fast. In a lot of cases, you look at Motorola and Iridium, which was an example used in the book. They thought big, they imagined satellite phones, but then they started big. They started with a $5 billion project, and it was going to take 15 years, and everything had changed by the time these things came out, and lo and behold, they didn't work very well.
And actually, if you don't mind the dynamic, and just because I want you to finish the thought, but right there, one of the problems of not starting small, I think that's your second bullet, is by not starting small, they can't afford to do any of it wrong. There's a cost dynamic that isn't so obvious, that when you make that big bet, boy, you better be right all along the way, because the cost of it, and you need to find ways to make it okay to make mistakes and learn from them.
Right.
And that only comes from starting small, making the investment one that you can handle, losing, being wrong, reinvesting in a different way.
Right. And then this is, I'm here interviewing you. I'm not here to pontificate, but certainly in my experience,
Go ahead.
well, a part of the problem is that once something like that starts, then everybody wants to prove the CEO right. When in fact, if the CEO rephrases it and says, basically, this is going to be a learning experience, so we're going to go do this. We assume it's not going to work right. Just learn things for me and teach me. Then that's the kind of thing that eventually leads to something useful. When you did your panel, you mentioned something I found intriguing about what QBE was doing in terms of, I think you called it a city campaign, where you're going out and looking for innovative startups. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about that? Because that sounds like a really interesting way of gathering information and doing this kind of thing you're talking about in terms of the culture.
Yeah, and it was terrific. Thank you. The organization Acela City is a combination, obviously, a portmanteau, accelerating cities development. Over half the population of the world live in cities, trying to make those cities more resilient, more sustainable, and finding ways to mitigate the risks, right? So that made it a natural area for an insurance company such as QBE to focus on, and that was kind of their slant. We're trying to, one of the biggest concentrations of risks we have today are the cities. What can we do to mitigate those? And in acknowledgement that many, if even maybe most of those solutions are going to come from creative startups. So we literally went out with a campaign that said, let's hear all the creative ideas that might address that. And we had 400 plus respondents from 40 plus countries around the world, which, by the way, is an exciting element of, there were creative companies coming from Nigeria and from Poland and from Brazil and from Colombia, come around the world, and relevant solutions for a Los Angeles or a Chicago or a New York. Very much an hour ago, I was a part of the selection of the winning group. The breadth of the—
Oh, go ahead and tell us who won. Give us a hint.
A group called Ferrum, and many of these are all focusing on, for instance, how to recycle, how to reduce heat in cities, how to make poles more powerful, intelligent, cheaper to run, better light, giving us security. Everything from worm farms built next to recycling plants that digest, and the enzymes come out with a biodegradable product.
Wow.
It's more fun than you could imagine. And one of the reasons I think I mentioned it, and you probably looked at the panel more recently than I did, but I think I raised it in particular around the idea that, yes, we're looking for ideas, but part of doing it was there's an excitement within the company, so everybody paid attention to it. So they knew we're saying we can learn from outside, and we want to expose all of you to new creative ideas and just be excited about that. We also found that through it, we created lots of opportunities for leadership to arise. One of the problems I've always said with a large company is it's a pyramid, and there's fewer and fewer senior jobs. And when we talk about diversity, whether it be gender or nationality or any other state, the problem is we only have so many jobs, you can only create so many opportunities. No, get creative about that. You have an initiative like this, and all of a sudden we have panels, we have pre-screened folks who go out and interview these. You end up having mentoring teams. You end up having opportunities to invest in and give visibility to up and coming leaders within the organization. So there can be lots of things about doing something that's creative where the benefits and the dividends are much broader than the activity itself.
So I agree totally. Everybody loves to be innovative, and if you can do that kind of thing in a way that harnesses the energy and lets people sort of self-identify as the types who can be the leaders of the firm, then
Well said.
away you go. There were a few specific things mentioned on the panel that I'll just sort of toss out.
Mhm.
I'm not going to make you go through all of them, but give you an opportunity to maybe address some of these things further. Your panelists talked about the power potentially of reverse mentoring. I loved it because the executive VP, I'll do an injustice to her name. I think it was Kumju. Talked about
You did pretty
reverse.
well.
Oh, okay. Talked about being reverse mentored and actually used a clip of her dancing with some young folks trying to imitate BTS, the popular group. I was so intrigued that you mentioned that you were once a backup singer for Linda Ronstadt, which I think people would probably pay money to see. But anyway.
Yeah, and then pay money to forget they thought.
I digress.
There's movies about that, I think.
So I'll just reverse mentoring was one thing people talked about, change management and the importance of actually embedding these sorts of ideas into the organization was another one. And then diversity and inclusion, which is a hot button for me, is also one that was mentioned. Do you want to tackle any of those topics in terms of the importance for an innovation culture?
Hugely in favor. Again, some of these are, it's just a statement, a concept that you want people to understand. Senior management believes it isn't age teaching youth. You know, the fact that at Thinkably, we have a youth board. The oldest person on it's 19. I've been a champion that charities should work hard at not just putting on the board a bunch of 60 plus folks to try to solve these problems when they don't recognize many of the words that are contributing to the issues. So listen to the younger folks. And what was that great quote? I don't even remember who said it, who said the creative adult is the child that survived. You know, the fact is we've lost so many things that a young mind, agile, that hasn't been imprisoned by all what we've learned. Right, and we should figure out ways to tap into that. So huge fan. The D&I, like you, very important for me. The last 3 hires at QBE evidencing that they don't just mouth the words, have all been women. The NEDs, QBE North America, are all female but one. And there was no sacrifice of talent. We had a plethora of talented women to choose from that were all exceptional. And that's just one demonstration. But I do think seniors have to make sure that they are demonstrating in easy ways, something they have control of, who you hire at the board level. You might have to work a bit harder. You might have to find a better search firm.
But are there, I guess I'll ask, are there, particular change management efforts you've seen work at QBE or not work, or maybe just to give us a headline on that?
I guess I'll use a bit of a plug. I think that the way you framed it actually tees up the fact that change management is often best aided by the use of a professional third party. So a little plug for something like Reference Point. But it's not just that it's a plug. The fact is, change management is a great idea as long as I don't have to change. It helps to have a third party come in, even if they take the very idea that's articulated well by the CEO, but helps in the implementation, because that implementation is hard to do to yourself. So I'll just leave it with that.
Okay. Toward the end of his life, I had the privilege of interviewing Peter Drucker a couple of times. It was actually kind of interesting because once he totally set me up. I was interviewing him in front of an audience and we agreed on the questions ahead of time like you and I had. And then in public, I asked him one of those questions and he said, "That's the wrong question. Had you set me up?" And he totally did, and then went off and gave a wonderful answer. But he said people don't change, they just die. And then the new generation comes along and does things differently. But I hope we can do a little better than that. So that's most of what I wanted to cover. I
Yeah.
am intrigued by what you said about thinkably and sort of the importance for the future. I've actually just written a book that's about designing 2050 based on all the resources from computing and so forth that are going to be available to us.
I'd love to read drafts, but short of that, give me one of the early copies.
Oh yeah, no, I will send you one after we're done. But just sort of, I guess I'm asking you to summarize by talking a little bit about the importance of innovation, just sort of broadly. You've had quite a long and distinguished career, as you said, in a whole bunch of different areas. And what do you see innovation unleashing, whether in terms of our kids and grandkids or in terms of businesses?
Yeah, well, this has been a great interview, and I very much enjoyed it with you, Paul. I go back, I guess, complimenting the IAS and Josh Landau and the group, because I do think they showed some courage in broadening the topic from what we typically do, is make it all about technology. And if you go back to my earlier point, where in my opinion, the innovative culture is the critical ingredient in a successful company, particularly for the large companies. You're really talking, and now I'll go back to your battle word, but it's not a battle between large and small. It's a battle between the traditional growth that benefits from pattern recognition and stability, and trying to celebrate, if not be proselytizers, for living and breathing creativity. I have to say that at my headline, and I don't have a mantra per se, and certainly not one as well articulated as yours, but it would probably be something about starting with every great and successful and kind of worthy company starts with purpose. However, you must have purpose in my mind for the worthiness, but it's not enough. I like coupling it with have purpose, have clarity in the vision, but then live and breathe creativity. Be bold, take chances, break patterns, embrace and learn from mistakes, and do this all fast. And the key is to realize that people, the employees, on an individual level will thrive. And I'm not even sure people think hard enough about the importance of that. They will, in that environment, continually, daily, learn and grow. They'll be more productive, they'll be more satisfied, and they'll have more fun. And I think it was Einstein who said that creativity is intelligence having fun. And fun's underrated. It's an essential part of a healthy, growing mind. And as Vonnegut said, food for the soul. So bottom line of maybe this session for me, it is embrace creativity and make it a pathway for everything that you do.
I love that idea. I love that quote, and I will freely steal it.
As I did.
Yeah, I also love the idea of purpose, and that's actually what attracted me to insurance when I decided to get involved about 8 years ago. There is so much that insurance does. People talk about the noble purpose, and I believe it. So I think be creative, be intelligent, having fun, and then sort of work toward this purpose of making people whole and safe and comfortable and so forth that insurance does. So I very much appreciate you taking the time. I see why the IAS had you moderate that forum. As far as I'm concerned, Josh ought to have you on every panel he can possibly talk you into from here to eternity.
And right back at you, Paul. I'm looking forward to seeing the next your next work. You are not as well known as you should be, and I'm sure you will be. I've enjoyed all your books that I've read, and I'll get to more of them.
Well, I appreciate that. And I encourage people to follow up with that panel. We'll have the details as a slide at the end of this so people can go to the IIS Global Insurance Forum. Obviously, I encourage people to also check out our work at insurancethoughtleadership.com, in particular to sign up for our weekly Six Things newsletter. And then I'll just say, Truett, this was a true delight, and I look forward to our next interaction. Thank you.
And thank you.